Okay, guys, I am here today with Tammy Willet. Tammy is a survivor sister of mine, and she is going to be breaking her silence in some ways today. And we are starting a brand new episode series called By Faith. And so, by faith, Tammy today is going to tell us her story. So, Tammy, welcome to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we are excited to have you. We are excited to have you. Tammy, we are working together right now, and we'll talk about this a little bit at the end of the episode. So, guys, make sure that you stay tuned for the at the end of the episode, because we are doing some exciting work for a Christmas family right now as it pertains to the topic of today's conversation. But I'm going to allow Tammy to tell her story through some careful questioning. Guys, I do want you to know that this episode does contain some difficult subject matter, as Tammy is both a survivor of domestic violence herself, and she is an angel mom. And what does that mean? That means that she lost a child to domestic violence. So, Tammy, thank you for being here today. As we step into this conversation, and this whole goal of this series of this podcast is, I want to know, why do some people who have suffered loss like you, why do some people keep the faith, and why do some people walk away? So I think my first, and our scripture is out of Hebrews chapter 11, where is the most common. I call it the Hebrews chapter 11 Hall of Fame. But by faith, and then the Lord decides to put a name. And if the Bible were still being written today, I wonder how many of us would be in the Hebrews chapter 11 Hall of Fame. So I'm curious. We know that from that scripture that faith is the evidence of things hoped for, and the substance of things hoped for, and the evidence of things not seen. That's a cool. I mean, that's a Bible verse, but faith means something different to everybody, and especially in different seasons of their lives. And so, Tammy, I want to start the podcast by asking you, what does faith mean to you?
Faith and hope are intertwined. You can't have one without the other. So to me, as faith is believing, believing that there is something after, believing that there's a creator of the universe, my God, I choose to call him God, my Abba Father. It's faith and hope is believing that there's something greater than all of us.
Right.
And I don't try not to judge people when, it doesn't matter what religion, it's not about religion. It's about a relationship with your higher power.
Right. Agreed. Yeah. And so faith, I love that you said that, and especially kicking off this series, that faith and hope are intertwined, right? And the Bible tells us hope deferred makes a heart sick. And so that leads us back to faith, like knowing. And when you read Hebrews chapter 11, by faith Noah, by faith Abraham, by faith Isaac, by faith Jacob. And so, yeah, they had to have had a hope in what was promised to them. And so I think you're absolutely right that faith and hope have to be intertwined, especially when you experience loss and trauma. And this is where I want you to begin to tell us your story. And so you have the unfortunate double Dutch trauma of domestic violence. And so I want to first start off by talk to us a little bit about your own journey with domestic violence and where you are today personally as it pertains to those things.
I was not saved at that point in my time that I was being abused. I didn't have a relationship with God. It's not that I ever doubted, because I grew up in a family that had a Lutheran minister and a Baptist minister and a Pentecostal preacher were my uncles. So, I grew up knowing who Christ was, but I had never given my life to the Lord. I'd never invited him into my heart and said the prayer of salvation. I was just but I knew who God was. And it wasn't that I didn't believe. I knew, but I wasn't ever, once I became an adult, I stopped going to church. I had met my husband. I was a single mom with 2 kids by 2 different dads. And I was the joke of the family. I know my daddy never, God rest his soul, he didn't mean it. But he would be like, oh, how long is this one going to stick around? He actually had me believing in my mind that nobody was ever going to love me because I already had 2 kids, who's going to love this lady who's 30 now, 30 something, 2 children out of wedlock by 2 different fathers. And he made jokes.
Your dad.
That, stuck with me and in my heart and in my spirit, I had received that. And my daddy never meant to hurt me, but my belief in that I was worthy of being loved was practically nothing. He was teasing, but my heart took it serious. Yeah. So when my ex came along and asked me to marry him, he wasn't a super good looking guy. I'm not really sure why I married him. I think that I married him because he was the first guy that I asked. Yeah. And I didn't want to be that single mom for the rest of my life. So at the time, I think I loved him, but now not so much. Well, he was a drunk. He was a drunk. I can remember he would, when we lived in our hometown, he would get drunk and we would all be together with my girlfriends. I mean, I drank at the time, but I always ended up having to be the driver so he'd stop. And he was just a stupid drunk in the beginning. He was just dumb. He would get drunk and black out. He was just embarrassing. I would send him out drinking with my girlfriend. So I was like, no, I'm staying home, but do not bring him home. You keep him with you. If you're going to take him out and get him drunk, you guys keep him with you because I don't want to deal with it. He would come in and wake me up just to pick an argument. And he was stupid. That's how I looked at it at the time. Well, he had originally moved from Maine to Texas to meet his biological father for the first time. Well, his father ended up not being such a great dad. And he drank, and his drinking after we got married really escalated. And he wanted to move to Florida where his twin brother and older brother lived. And I was like, okay, maybe that would make him happy if he were closer to family that love him. I was that fixer. I wanted to fix him. Yeah. Well, we packed up all of our stuff. We moved to St. Petersburg, Florida, Pinellas County. Yeah.
That's where I am. Yeah, that's where I am right now. Well, I'm not in St. Pete, but Pinellas. Cool.
So we went there and things escalated from there. That was the biggest mistake. I could not keep a job because he would call up there 15 times during an 8-hour shift. He, instead of, for a long time, it was verbal abuse and calling me names. And I just thought of it as mean drunk. When we moved to Florida, he got with his brothers. That drinking escalated to the point of him putting me up against a wall by my throat. My children witnessed it. Brandy was 15 and my son was 12. And we were just like, and I knew that if he went out drinking, if he would just be still and pass out, everything would be okay. So I can remember putting my 2 kids in the car and we would drive around. And just one time I just pulled into the Target parking lot and took a nap because it was like, just give him the time to be still so he'll go to sleep if there's nothing going on. And then there won't be an argument. But it escalated really, really quick. He worked nights, so he had it in his head that I was cheating on him. And I was like, I don't know anybody here. He was going through my phone. It was just ridiculous. I didn't know anybody. He would get in the car and leave me and the kids there and be gone for days. He'd go stay at his brother's. We had no food. I had no access to the money. And he would come home and laugh about it. That I gave Brandy and Sean whatever there was in the cabinet. I went without food. And he used to think he would come home drunk and think that was funny. One night we were next door at the neighbors and he locked us out of the house and wouldn't listen. We ended up having to camp out at the neighbor's house. He was into a lot of stuff. But the day that he put me up against the wall by my throat, 2 people happened to witness it. My neighbors across the hallway in our apartment. And they called 911. He went to jail. And then his mother calls and said, well, aren't you going to go get him? What do you think I did? I went and got him.
Absolutely. And I want to just stop here just for a second, because if you're on the other end of this, if you're listening to our voices, what she just said that she did is very common. Very, very common. And we're going to provide some resources at the end of this episode for you to understand that that doesn't have to be your story. But I didn't mean to interrupt you, Tammy, except
No,
for
that's
I
okay.
want,
I agree.
I want survivors who are listening to know that this is common.
I went back. I went and got him out of jail. You know, I did what every domestic violence survivor has done. We take them back. Then things just kept getting worse. I can remember him holding my head in the pillow and punching me in the back of the head so he didn't leave any bruises. There was a sexual assault, and he thought because we were married, me saying, no, I don't want to do that. Please don't do that. Stop. Stop didn't have any, he had no limitations when he was drunk. And so there was a lot of sexual abuse. I didn't even want to be in the same room with him, let alone be intimate with him.
Right.
Then
So,
when I, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, so he goes to jail, you get him out, it continues. He clearly, I've got the DSM behind me. Those of you on YouTube can see the book, but the DSM is just like, I could probably turn to narcissistic, disorder right now, and you would probably be like, yeah, that's him. So you went back, and he continues to be a narcissist, and he continues to abuse. Where are you in your faith journey about this time?
During that time, I don't even think that I thought about faith at all. I felt isolated. I felt doomed, terrified, and fed up. The kids had come to Texas to visit their dad, and he beat me so bad that night. And I told him, you're never going to hit me again. And if I were you, I wouldn't go to sleep tonight. Mm. And I'm not proud of this part, Amy, and you can edit this out if you choose. I sat at the end of the bed in a metal folding chair and waited for him to go to sleep. And when he started snoring this really whiny, annoying snore that he had, I'm not real proud of this. I fought back. I pulled that bat out of my son's aluminum baseball bat from underneath the bed. And I knew that if I didn't break his leg, I better make it good, Tammy, because if he gets a hold of you, he's going to kill you. I did break his leg, along with a few other bones with him. And he said, take me to the hospital. He's bleeding everywhere. And I was like, nope, walk. Because when he went to sleep that night, when I told him don't go to sleep, he said, good night. He said the B-I-T. And I was like, good night. Good night. I told you, So I fought back that night. He couldn't get to me. I refused to call for help. I called his twin brother. And I said, come and get him. Come and get your brother and don't bring him back here. And I had already planned on leaving and had been doing the back work at that point to get us out of there. Because in any situation, to get in a domestic violence situation, I know in the state of Florida, because we had a police report, they gave me relocation funds. Wow. I can remember meeting them at the police department, and they gave me, I had to do the homework. I had to, find out what the hotel rooms, gas, an estimate of all costs. And they gave me $1,800 to come back to Texas. So the kids were home by then. And we had a friend of ours from Houston area come down and pick us up with a low boy trailer. And I told my abuser's twin brother, if you bring him back here before this date, he will go to jail, and I'm not getting him out again. So we packed up and we left. We came back to Texas. I had been so stressed out that one of my friends from my kids' childhood had invited me to come to church with her. And it was a non-denominational church. And they were actually holding church in an old bar. The building used to be a bar that back in my wild days I drank at. And that's where they were having church. And they were having a women's Bible study. And I can remember it was some kind of sandwich and I hadn't eaten and I just couldn't. So stressed out. And I can remember it was so peaceful there. And I sat at that women's group and I ate, and the food tasted good and it stayed down. And I was like, I just need to bring my food right here and sit on the steps and just eat every day, eat every meal here. Because I knew then there was that place gave me peace and comfort. And I was finally able to eat and breathe. I slept that night like I hadn't slept before. I continued to go to that Bible study, and I wanted to know Jesus. I wanted to know this man who died on the cross for me. I wanted to know him better. I wanted more. So I dug deep. My mentor, I won't give her name and I don't want to embarrass her, but I'm short. I'm 4'8.5". Well, my friend she led me to the Lord, and she's not much taller than I am. She's a little bit taller than me, but she sang on the praise and worship team. And she, has always been there for me through thick and thin. She's still, even when I was making mistakes, because after I lost Brandy, it got worse. So she led me to the Lord, and I was going to church. Then was working at a gas station right off of the highway. Who do you think walked in?
Oh no.
I'm in the middle of a shift. I've already got a home for me and the kids. Here comes my ex-husband, my abuser, walking in the gas station. I was like, and he hugged me and cried and said, I left everything I owned in Florida. I had to be with you and the kids. He would have never found me if I had not been working at that gas station. I believed him. Oh, he must really love me. Took him back.
Oh my gosh.
For about another 3 months. And then I sent him packing. But I took him back. I believed him. The reality of the fact is that when he was extremely drunk and when he sobered up, he was closer to Texas than he was to turn around and go back to Florida.
Yeah.
But I was dumb enough to believe it.
Well, and again, I think I'm actually shocked to hear that you took him back after all of that. And there's a lot to unpack there. And these episodes, the By Faith Tammy episodes, are going to be 2 episodes because we can not possibly cover her faith journey as a domestic violence survivor and also as an angel mom in 1 episode. So this episode, we are definitely focusing on your journey with domestic violence because it deserves, as does Brandy's story, it deserves its own space. And so there's a lot to unpack there for the listeners, right?
Yeah.
And so you didn't know the Lord, and that's when you were telling that story of the baseball bat, and I don't mean to laugh, I really don't. It's probably terrible, but it reminded me of that movie, that Farrah Fawcett movie, The Burning Bed, where like she legitimately just burns him in the house and leaves because she has just had it. And so I think survivors out there, that's where we get pushed. My story, I didn't get pushed that way because it's not my makeup. And so my anger got turned very inside, and my health and all of that was heavily affected. I never was able to get it out. Not that I am a proponent of breaking people's legs with baseball bats, but I understand. And I think that the listeners out there understand. And so what is really interesting to me, though, is so then you went to church and you said, I wanted to know more about this Jesus. Let's dive into that for a second, because you had no reason to want to know more about the God of the universe. You had no reason. Like, you had a decent childhood, sounds like.
Yes, I did.
But then you had, you had 2 children out of wedlock, which I know brings a lot of shame. And I want to say to you today, even though that was so many years ago, that shame wants us to think that we are the mistake, not that we made the mistake. And so, again, I'm talking to listeners out there. The one of you that's got the earbud in, hoping your abuser's not hearing this episode. You are not broken because you are not fitting some stereotypical picture of what the world tells you, or even the Bible. And this in this terrible stage of your life, the fact that you have 2 children out of wedlock is inconsequential. God does not care. And so a lot of people, Tammy, and I wonder if you agree with me, who have made mistakes, and I air quote when I say that, you weren't even a Christian, but have had children out of wedlock, or who've done drugs, or who have hit back, in a domestic violence situations, they begin to feel shame. And then, am I right in that your value just continues to get diminished?
Yes, and he came to church with me. We were, trying to work it out, but it was obvious that he couldn't change and I couldn't fix it. And my pastor there, just if you want to work on this marriage, you need to do it separately. And that's when we separated and divorced. I never explained to my children why we left Florida like we did. It was very quiet. We didn't tell anybody what was going on. I had a home in the middle of nowhere set up for us here in Texas. We came back home where things were normal, where we knew people, where we had a support system. And my church became a huge, great portion of my life. I was that mother that every time the church doors were open, I was in ministry. I was in the doors because I'm a recovering addict through several things, but my addiction was to prescription meds. If we don't, it's really easy. Well, I'll get into that a little more later, but I'm a recovering addict. I always will be. I just choose not to use.
Right.
God has a very big sense of humor because now I take like 3 high blood pressure pills and a heart pill. The person who can't take medicine, I'm like, God, that's funny.
But yeah, it is. And I think addiction also, speaking to listeners, is very common in these situations. My listeners know, and for those of you who just dropped in on this podcast, an addiction to pain pills is a huge part of my story, especially when I left my domestic violence situation. But I do want to continue. I want to go back because I really want to know the answer to this question. Is you did not know him. You knew about God because of church, of uncles and things of that nature. You walked away from the church when you left home or when you had your children. You enter into this domestic violence marriage that's terrible, and you deal with that, and you do some things that you're not proud of, and all of the things. But then suddenly, somehow, some way, you go, I want to know about Jesus. I want to know that story. Like, how did you? Because most people would be like, I don't want to know about God, because if God is all he said he is, then he wouldn't have allowed this to happen. Do you remember that still small voice or that prick of your heart when you said, when your friend invited you to that church and you felt the peace and you ate food? And by the way, this is how we reach people. We feed them, we house them, we clothe them, we love them. But I want to know this story. Why did you want to know more about Jesus when you had just gone through so much?
Because he reached in and grabbed my heart. I mean, it almost felt like there was such a drawing, because there was so much joy in that church and so much authenticity. And they were just normal people just like me.
Yeah.
The pastor of that church was an old addict. He was a football coach, high school football coach, before he ever became a pastor. And I had actually moved in. My daughter went to live with her dad. I moved in upstairs above my pastor's home. He had renovated, we called it the White House. He had renovated the entire upstairs of this big, huge house into efficiency apartments. So my son and I went and lived there. And I did, they nurtured me, and they taught me. He gave me some great advice on life. And a lot of what he taught us was just really good stuff. And it was teaching I wanted to learn. I still love learning, especially when it doesn't cost me anything and it doesn't cost me any heartache. But I just felt like I desired to know Christ more. When the altar call was given that Sunday, and I just went up there and I was on my knees and I was just sobbing because Lord, please fix the pieces inside of me that were broken. We would have Thursday night prayer, and that prayer group, we would be in church on Thursday. I think it was on Thursday. We just wanted to know more. I wanted to know what gave everybody else that great joy, even in bad situations. I wanted that. I wanted what everybody else had that was around me.
Well, and you hit on we haven't mentioned this for a while on this podcast, but we say this podcast has 3 C's: church, community, counseling. And of course, we highlight Jesus, who is the star of the story. And Tammy, it is so refreshing to hear that you found a church where you wanted their Jesus.
I didn't feel judged. I could let them see the real me. And, it was very much a hospital for the sinners. It was not a country club for the believers. This place and this church grew. And I was there for many years. I think, oh gosh, 4 years. My daughter Brandy would go to church with me a few times. But she was a teenager, she was 15, 16. My son, I'll never forget the day we were driving home from church. And he said, Mom, when you die and go to heaven, I said, yes. He was 12. I was so excited. He said, when I die, I'm going to see you there. And I pulled the car over and I just cried. He was so excited. I didn't know how to pay my bills. I didn't know how to do a budget. My pastor's wife, they truly just wrapped their arms around me and taught me so much. Some of it, I didn't necessarily agree with.
Right.
People still talk poorly about that church, and since we've moved away, but they were just the real deal.
Well, and look, that is the message here. Yeah. Our stories are so similar, it's eerie, but again, it was for me. Now, I became a Christian when I was 15 years old, but in terms of my domestic violence and where a church and a community came alongside of me, was also a Wednesday night Bible study. And I have very close friends still to this day. But if you are listening to Tammy's story, guys, so my whole motivation and direction of this series, this By Faith series, as we evaluate the Hebrews 11 Hall of Fame, where the Bible says, faith is the evidence of things hoped for, and the substance of things hoped for, and the evidence of things not seen. And so, Tammy, had you judged God on the things that you saw, you would not want him. I mean, well, let me rephrase that, because you did judge God on the things that you saw with the people. But if you decided whether or not you wanted to step into faith and the completed work of Jesus on the cross based on your circumstances, and there were more to come, right? And we're going to talk about that on the next podcast. There was another major thing that happened where I can't wait to hear where your faith was on that. But as we close this particular episode where we're talking about your story, and you came to know the Lord and you held on to your faith because of his people, because of a community, because you wanted their joy. And so if you're out there listening, the Tammys and Amys of the world are walking in your churches. I know the very first time I walked into Calvary Church in Clearwater, Florida, I sat in the very back row of the church, walked out, didn't speak to a soul. We are in your churches. We are in your Bible studies. We are in your outreach programs. And lots of people right now will blame God for trauma. And Tammy, your story is very interesting to me, that it drove you to want to know more about Jesus and not drive you away from a higher power that could have done something to help or put you further into addiction. And so as we close this part one of the podcast, I would love it if you would just think for a second, and I'm YouTube listeners, you can tell I'm literally staring up at the sky. But Tammy, if you had a message to somebody with an earbud in their ear right now, with their abuser laying right beside them, and they don't know Jesus, what is your message to them?
That there's somebody greater than you and I. We can be the mouthpiece of Christ, but there's someone greater than I, greater than you. You have, our Heavenly Father loves us so much. And, if religion tells you that God hates divorce, all of that cliche stuff, please just know that God, we serve a God of second chances, as in he gives us a chance after chance after chance. So no matter what you've done, he still loves you. His son still died on the cross for you. And he's calling your name. And he wants better for you than what is happening in your life right now. There's so much more that he wants to bless you with.
Yes.
So even when you pray, when you're talking to God, just talk to him. You don't have to have all the fancy words. It doesn't have to be this perfect prayer. Cry out, because I promise when you cry out to Christ, he hears you. Stay safe. And when it's your time, use a safety plan, reach out to resources, reach out, and Christ is going to keep you safe. So reach out to Jesus. And all you have to do is say a simple prayer in your mind. Let him in. Say, Lord, I love you. I need you. Come into my heart and guide me in the ways that are good. And he will. He's faithful, guys. He's so faithful.
Could not agree more. And I think that anyone who knows any part of my story knows that he has been faithful. All of my life, he has been faithful. And I listen to that song a lot. It's one of my favorites, most played songs in 2022, The Goodness of God. And when I hear CeCe Winans, her voice, all my life he has been faithful. All of my life he has been so, so good. Sometimes, Tammy, those traumatic memories will pop up in my mind, and he was still good. And if you're out there asking, Amy, how can you ask that? Make sure you are following this podcast, because we are going to talk about this with people all over the world, some of whom did not hang on to their faith. But let me tell you that Isaiah 55 says that his ways are higher, his ways are better, his ways are stronger. And I know if you're the person laying in the bed with an earbud lying next to your abuser, you cannot understand what we are talking about. But keep it here, because we got nothing but hope coming for you. Because Tammy, I was thinking the other day as we close out here, I was thinking the other day, I don't know if you are like me, and at night you have your phone and you're scrolling up on Instagram Reels and TikTok. And TikTok in particular has a lot of creators who are ill, who are dying. And so I was watching this TikTok the other day, and they were like, "There's no hope. We've called in the family," and the person was very, very, very ill. And as I was scrolling it, and I knew that my faith that took such a hit in my story has been healed, because the first thing that popped in my mind when I thought this story, these people on the TikTok video said, "There's no hope. The doctors have given her no hope." And the first thing I thought in my mind was, but wait. But God, we always have hope. And so that's how faith and hope are intertwined. So before we end this episode, I do want to talk quickly, because you just mentioned about reach out to resources. I want to speak quickly about some things that we have going on together, you and I. So you work for an organization called Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence. That is an organization that I worked with a few years ago, and walked away for that for reasons that you understand. However, Tammy works for them now, and we have adopted a family, and it is all over my Facebook and Instagram where you can help this family. Their Amazon wish list are there. But this young lady, this family of four, his mom was killed by her by her husband, and I believe the children's father. I'm not sure if it was all four of their fathers, but so they are orphans, and we are helping them for Christmas. But tell us a little bit more about Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence, and just give me like your best 30, 45-second pitch where they can find Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence if they want to support an angel family, because we got this family take on lockdown. By the time people hear this episode on Wednesday of this week, we will be done with that family. However, on my link tree, I will have a link for you guys to help break the silence against domestic violence, to sponsor a family for Christmas. And so tell us a little bit about Break the Silence Against Domestic Violence and how they can sponsor an angel family.
This organization literally saved my life. They came along at a time later on after my daughter's death, and that's a whole nother story, whole nother topic. But they came alongside me during that worst dark, while I was a grieving parent. and they lifted me up. They reminded me of a dolphin pod. You can find our website at breakthesilencedv.org, and I'll give you that link to that, Amy, when we get done. And I realized that there was hope. There were survivors like myself. I wasn't alone. There were grieving parents like myself that were not alone. And I volunteered with them for 10 or 11 years now. And about a year and a half ago, they opened a position for our legacy families director. And what does a legacy family director do? I work directly with families that have lost somebody to domestic violence specifically. And we call those children angel babies. So we have our Holidays of Hope program going on right now. And we have opened that up to survivor sisters as well. So survivor sisters are putting their children on our program, and we hope to get each child sponsored. At this point, I have about 149 kids that need to be sponsored.
Okay, you guys do that? Hold on. 149 kids that need to be sponsored for Christmas. And it's only like a $35 commitment, right, Tammy?
Yes, ma'am. You could, if they go to our website and then click on join and support us, it'll bring a drop down screen, and then it will say, you will see Holidays of Hope there. You can click on that. Then you can scroll down, and you will see a line of three blocks on there. One is to donate and download a free calendar. The other is donate any amount. But the best one, the one that I love, is to adopt a child for the Christmas season and then shop till you drop.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Shop till you drop, which we're having a lot of fun doing with
I love it.
With this family.
These children, they are the silent victims of domestic violence.
Yeah.
They have either lost a parent or they've witnessed it. And it's such an important, these kids, many of them are so angry at God, that especially the angel babies that have, that are going to have to spend the rest of their lives not having mom and generally not having dad either, because it normally either a murder suicide or the perpetrator goes to prison. And these children are left to be cared for by grandma, by the grandparents. Possibly, I have one family, they literally had to come back out of retirement. They didn't have a second to grieve their loss. So, some of these families, it's hard. The survivor sisters, those children, these women who just escaped their abusive relationships, they're like I was in the beginning, trying to learn how to pay my bills and budget my money. And so they need help. And if we can get every child on this list adopted, I have until December 13th to get them all adopted. If not, then the organization will purchase one $35 gift for each child. So I want to encourage to get every baby adopted. It's important to me.
Yeah, guys, it's important to me too. And so I'm going to put the very first thing you're going to see when you see the show notes in this episode is the link, the direct link to adopt a child. I would love to come back because Tammy's By Faith episodes are going to be at least 2. So I'd love to come back in 2 weeks and tell you that where we've gained it is December the 4th, the day we're recording this. This will go live on December the 6th. That means we've got 7 days to get 140 kids sponsored. So please head to that link. Tammy, we are going to come back with you here in 2 weeks because you had an angel baby. And we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about what that meant for your faith, good, bad, or indifferent. So guys, come back in 2 weeks here for the By Faith series. We are in the By Faith Tammy episodes. I do hope that you have a Merry Christmas. And before I close this episode, I'm going to say the same thing I say to everybody. You guys know if I get a microphone in front of me, I say it. And Tammy, I want to proclaim it over you. You are seen, you are known, you are heard, you're loved, and you're so, so valued. Guys, Merry Christmas. Go hit that link. We'll be back in 2 weeks with the rest of Tammy's story.
Here I am. You can see that I'm nowhere near where I want to be.